Joining us now is Congressman Garret Graves, ranking member of the Select Committee on Climate and member of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Congressman, you become a leading voice on the Republican position on climate. Thanks so much for taking time out of your crazy schedule. And I just have to tell our audience right now, this is a very human moment. A lot of drama, a lot of tragedy already in Louisiana. I know you were out responding to Hurricane Ida. You have another hurricane coming in. And so can you give us a snapshot of what you're seeing? Because I know that's top of mind for you right now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your sensitivity there. The Hurricane Ida was incredible. We had winds clocked as high as 194 miles an hour, storm surge as high as 15 feet, and peak rain load appears to be around 18 inches. Any one of those could have been a disaster for many of our communities across the United States. Getting hit with the trifecta has just been devastating. So we still have a huge swath of the state without electricity. We have a lot of areas that don't have cell service, don't have internet connection, no water or wastewater systems. And to see it going on for this extended period in America in 2021 is just incredible. I mean, literally the hurricane came in and just wiped the earth of communities in some areas in South Louisiana. So a lot of recovery work going on, a lot of efforts by our first responders and others to try and get folks back to stable conditions. But I appreciate your sensitivity and making note of the challenges we're dealing with down here.
Well, look, I think it's almost in a way unfair, and I'm really grateful to you to let us have a conversation, because we're talking today about electric vehicles and trucks and fleets and shippers, and you're in the middle of a real crisis down there. But I think it gives us an opportunity as well to step back for a moment and say, what should we be learning from this? When it comes to talking about the infrastructure bill and getting it right, when it comes to thinking about the future of energy and also thinking about climate change, and I know you're on the conservative end of this, but I know these are issues you care about. What do you feel ought to be top of mind for us as we think about not tomorrow, but 5 years, 10 years down the road when it comes to these new big investments?
Sure. Well, look, there's no question, and I can show you areas down here where it really makes the case for this. You can either spend millions before a disaster improving resiliency, or you can spend billions after picking up the pieces. And we had a huge investment in 5 parishes, or our county equivalent, around the New Orleans area. And that system, that levee and protection system, performed very well. Had it not been in place, we would see billions of extra dollars in damages, and we would see countless lives that would have been lost. But then directly over to the west of that area, where there's very little to no levee protection, that is where you saw, or we now see, devastation. So there's no question that these resiliency, or these investments in resiliency, make sense, and that goes to ecological resiliency, structural, non-structural communities, all of it.
When it comes to thinking about the future of EVs and electric vehicle, electrifying everything, I know you've been worried about electricity shortages in the future, but how do you get the balance? I mean, that's where the tilt is going. And so how do you get that right? Because, when you kind of look at Louisiana now, you look at the long gas lines, you look where people are, where they are today, are EVs a potential piece of a response down the road?
Well, we don't have electricity, so
yeah.
You could drive until the batteries went dead, just like folks can drive their vehicles until they run out of gas. So we've had a number of gas trucks coming down, fuel trucks headed down to our communities, and folks literally taking fuel straight off the trucks in some areas. That's been a real savior. Look, I think in regard to EVs, taking it out of the disaster realm for just a minute, there's a role for EVs. There's no doubt. I actually have 2, maybe getting a 3rd, and they make sense in limited cases. But if you're a long haul truck driver, if you're used to driving and pulling a load like a horse trailer or a boat, it really isn't a viable option today, because its performance can't even begin to compare with that of a combustion engine in terms of the length that it can drive, the distance that it can drive, or the power that combustion engines have. You can even look at EVs today where they're utilized, and they're normally driven somewhere between 1/2 and 1/3 the mileage of regular combustion vehicles. It's normally a second or a third car for folks, and it normally is folks that are in, as you've seen from various analysis, from people that are in the higher economic or wage earner categories.
I think the first time we encountered each other was about 15 years ago after Hurricane Katrina. You were such a big part of bringing the community together, rebuilding after that. And I'm interested, both now, this is a constant story, right? So as you have the Builder Act, that's Garret Graves' Act, the Builder Act, and you're kind of looking at infrastructure and how to be smart about it, what are the dimensions of that you want the Biden administration to take seriously so that we make smart moves as you see it on infrastructure?
People have great infrastructure ideas all over the place. And it could be, let's make investments in clean energy infrastructure. Let's revise our electricity grid to be able to facilitate these new green energy or clean energy projects moving forward. Or it could be, we need to make investments in the resiliency of our coastal ecosystem. We need to make investments in the resiliency of our coastal communities. But today, the amount of time that it takes to actually go from concept to construction is absurd. And having worked on these projects most of my life, I can tell you that there are projects that we've worked on that have been stuck in this pre-construction phase, not just for years, but for decades. And these are projects like trying to restore our coastal wetlands, trying to build levee or restore levee protection from communities. And I'm glad you brought up Hurricane Katrina, because that's an example of where we got a waiver from a lot of these constraints or a lot of these studies and analysis. And it worked really well. It worked well for the environment, and it allowed for an efficient construction process. And so it really is an example of a win-win. The Builder Act stays focused on actually implementing and getting to the outcome of these projects, whether they're, again, ecological restoration projects or community resilience projects or road projects. It stays focused on the objective. Let's get these things built, and let's have that proper balance of project outcome and environmental protection.
Let me get another question. You and I have talked about it last time we spoke about communities. Because a lot of times when you have new investment, and part of the question is, how do you make it inclusive? We have communities of color and others have been left on the sidelines of this. You have a lot of folks down in Louisiana that may live in places where you don't have the energy projects, and you've got, transportation challenges within the state of Louisiana. Does the infrastructure bill become a potential bridge to begin to help people get where the jobs are? Or is that naive on my part?
Well, look, I want to be clear that we need additional infrastructure investments in the United States, and it's not a scenario where you can't afford to do it. It's a scenario that you can't afford not to. And an example is, for Hurricane Katrina, we probably could have saved well over $100 billion, with a B, $100 billion, by investing somewhere around $8 billion on the front end, actually improving the resiliency of the communities and saving well over 1,000 lives if that investment had been made. So I'm a big proponent of making the right, smart investments in infrastructure. The problem with the infrastructure bill is that the administration has, for example, in the Corps of Engineers said, we're not going to fund any projects that benefit oil and gas. Well, that you can't come out with that blanket statement. What happens if you have a refinery in a disadvantaged community? Does that mean the disadvantaged community suffers and you're not going to fund a resiliency project in that area? Or, for example, the Department of Transportation under Secretary Buttigieg has said that we're going to prioritize projects that benefit environmental justice, racial equity, or climate change. While I may be fully supportive of the objectives, transportation projects aren't the tool to solve those problems, and you're manipulating criteria to achieve your political goals, not what truly is the best return on investment for taxpayers. So I want an infrastructure bill. I want to increase infrastructure spending, but using these political criteria to manipulate who the winners and losers are, that's a big problem for Louisiana. I think it's a big problem for the nation.
Garret, just finally, when I just got back from Europe and was talking to people about EVs, the infrastructure going on there, trucks, fleet, shippers, what's going on in that front in the European context. If you go to Asia and look at what China is investing in and doing and wanting to yet again find a strategic space to dominate and be in, it's very clear that China and some other Southeast Asian nations are making big investment in this arena. I'm just interested from your perspective, whether the combination of the private sector and the government and these businesses that are going to deploy huge fleets, when it comes to the future of EVs, are we doing it the right way? Because my sense is we're behind. And I'm wondering if there are any warning flags going off among you or your colleagues about that.
I agree that there are warning signs going on all over the place. And I think the warning signs are really that you're right that China, Asia, and other countries are making huge investments in some of these EV and green energy technologies because they don't have the natural resources that we do in the United States. Instead of being focused on, I want everything to be solar or everything to be wind, what we need to be focused on is a clean energy future. And if we can base a clean energy future on resources that are in the United States versus those that are in China or controlled by China, that's a win-win for the United States. On the one hand, this administration's out there facilitating pipelines to transport Russian natural gas into Europe. On the other hand, they're stopping natural gas from being transported in the United States. We've got to focus our clean energy future on our own resources. We've got to look at America like a not-for-profit or a company. You base your strategic plan upon your assets and strengths. I'm afraid that what's happening right now is we're basing our strategic plan on the strengths of China and Russia. We're playing into their hands. We really need to recalibrate that strategy and have a clean energy future based on America's resources. We've led the world in reducing emissions over about the last 17 years, and I'm confident we can continue leading the world, but we've got to do it in a strategic way. And I think that's going to we're going to have to take a step back and be very thoughtful about what that is, because I think we're playing into the jaws of China right now.
Look, folks, I want everybody to know that this exchange I just had with Congressman Graves is practically a miracle because he got broadband, he got electricity to be able to do this. Hurricane Ida is serious, and it's an area of great stress. And we're very grateful. Congressman Garret Graves, ranking member, the Select Committee on Climate, Crisis, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee, and a member of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Thanks so much for joining us today. And, best of luck on everything you're doing to help folks down there during this very stressful time and what's coming up again.
Thank you. Bless you.
What a great show. That brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to the Environmental Defense Fund for its support for all of these programs. We've done 3 of them now, and to all of you attendees for joining this discussion and the other ones we've done. For those of you who have missed any of these conversations, we'll have the video up from these events up on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.